maybe I'll just start with a quick question to the guys, which is, any learnings that you've taken away from today, or anything that you've seen that has surprised you. I'm going to go to the. He's not the new boy. He's been with us. What? 4? How long totally now? 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, about 4 years now.
About 4 years, but yeah, he's new to the analyst life, so
for sure. I'm a freshie. Yeah.
So anything you've heard that kind of, or you found out when you were looking at this, you found interesting?
Yeah, well, I think it actually wasn't just necessarily from today. Obviously, Patrick and I have been doing a bit of research over the last few months. So actually been on the ground and listening to a bunch of the providers that are actually here today, a few of the vendors as well. I think the big piece, and we spoke about it earlier, was around, that adaptability is going to be the key driver, I think, in the future within the APAC market, right? So we spoke about it earlier on the APAC Spotlight keynote, but if you come in here with your one-stop shop, one purpose-built product, you're going to probably be pushed aside because every market here has got its own nuances. We talked a bit about the regulation pieces that are very prominent in the APAC space. We've talked a bit about cultural and language barriers being another barrier to getting through. So unless you can adapt to that, we talk about price sensitivity as well with markets like the Philippines and India. So if you aren't able to adapt in those sort of spaces, you're going to find a very big struggle to actually launch if you're not already in some of these regions already. Yeah.
Interesting. Patrick, anything you've picked up?
A couple of things. I normally start with criticism of my own research strategy, which isn't particularly useful. I think the really interesting thing, and it's something that we've repeated previously in this, you've got Australia and New Zealand and then maybe Singapore there's a lot of synergies between markets that we deal with on a regular basis. And then you look at the Southeast Asian markets, and I think what I would question, both from a Cavell research perspective in terms of what we do, but also from a UCaaS provider perspective, is are the solutions fit for purpose for that market? Are the market-leading UCaaS solutions going to be sold at scale in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in India at the current price points that they're at? And I think the argument at the moment is, the way I see it, is probably not. When you see the price and mobility that you were talking about earlier on, there was an interesting discussion you were just having about the relevance of FMC in these markets. I don't see Indian businesses paying a premium for FMC. I realise there's some use case in terms of tracking the data, but I think there's a very different approach, both that we have to take from an understanding of those markets, but also that providers need to take if you want to try to take products and solutions to Southeast Asian markets.
Yeah, and I think I'm always, as you know, interested in, I thought a really interesting discussion about the go-to-market for those who are here. I think this interesting piece that there's these non-standard, non-traditional channels coming in, as well as the convergence, and obviously, we've been talking about the specialization. So these non-traditional channels, I think Rowan was saying, which was very interesting, from Switch Connect about the non-traditional channels he was seeing coming. I think that's really interesting to see how that kind of plays out. And we've been doing quite a bit of work on the CRM space recently, looking at, and if you look at some of the people who are growing, if you look at all the CRMs around Europe and around the world, if you look at the top 10, you see certain players who've done really, really well by associating with those ecosystems and how that kind of plays together, and these non-traditional channels. And I think it's really interesting to see how that works out.
And I think that's something that we've looked at previously. We've looked at LATAM markets. We've also looked, you've worked and done projects, and we've looked at Africa markets. There are a number of different community-based selling, advocacy-based selling that you don't see in the primary markets that we operate in. And actually, those are going to be critical in some of these markets. You made the point earlier on, and we heard it repeatedly on research calls. If you do not have a local affiliate in the Philippines, you are very unlikely to be able to sell a product in the Philippines. So I think that point about channels is absolutely key in terms of route to market, the different types of solutions you're going to have to use, we heard a lot about resale versus agency. I would argue there's probably a plethora of different models that we actually haven't hit upon yet, that actually, in order for westernized technology to be sold in those markets, are going to have to be explored. So I think that's a really key piece.
Have we got any questions? Sam?
All right, I have a question for you guys. So we talked a lot about UC today, we talked a little bit about contact center banking, and we talked about zero about CPaaS. But when you look at everyone's industry growth rates, the fastest growing part of business models is CPaaS. How do you think about that?
I don't know if I agree that everybody's business, every CPaaS business is growing really fast.
No, if you look at the three segments, the fastest, the industry analysts predict the fastest growing segment.
Yeah. Yes, sort of. I kind of agree, sort of. We haven't, and I think you're right, we haven't talked about it. It's probably particularly relevant in the Asian market more than anywhere because of the messaging and mobile propensity. So I would definitely agree that we haven't talked enough about that because as we saw in your spotlight on Asia, your piece about the importance of messaging and mobile and those pieces. So I do think in this this region it's particularly relevant. I guess, as you know, we've talked about it before, I struggle a little bit with this. Some of the CPaaS businesses haven't been growing very fast because they've struggled to move out of the simple authentication and use cases, but others have, clearly. So I think, so how do I answer your question? So I think one of the interesting things, we're about to do a piece of research on this because messaging, so let's call it, let's not call it CPaaS, let's call it messaging. I think there's a huge opportunity that is being represented globally around messaging, about who really wins. Is it the CPaaS player and the developer, or is it an intermediary like these service providers and like yourselves who can sell messaging? We're doing a spotlight on, we're doing some research at the moment about what's the best practice for a service provider to take messaging to market. So I think there's a huge opportunity there because my fundamental feeling is if you're in the business communications space, if you sit here thinking I'm going to be a business communications provider and you don't monetize messaging, then it doesn't quite make sense. Now, the challenge has been in different markets, it's very inconsistent globally about how you go about doing that. So if you're a US provider, it's always kind of been part of your business. So in essence, you've always made money out of messaging to some degree. If you're a European provider, not necessarily, because it's been quite hard to do for various regulatory reasons. But I think some of those things are breaking down and people are looking at how to drive over OTT messaging. So yeah, I think short, if we don't call it CPaaS, because I just get in my head about CPaaS and what really is CPaaS, and is CPaaS just about large wholesale authentication. If I get past that, if I think about it in terms of messaging, I think there is a big opportunity, but it also comes back to the intelligent workplace because messaging is about workflow. So where you really drive strong messaging opportunities is where you employ it into workflow. I've told this story, and apologies to the people who know me very well. I do a lot of diligence and M&A work. I got asked to look at this company called 15 Below about 2 years ago. And they were the company that provided travel software to all the airlines when you lose your baggage. So when you lose your bag or you have a problem, they provide the middleware to all the airlines, literally all the airlines globally. And I got brought in by the PE who were investing because they had 25% of their revenue and 30% of their margin was from messaging. Because they built the workflow software, and therefore they were the best people to offer messaging. And they very cleverly built a least cost routing platform in front of all the CPaaS players to maximize revenue. And they made 30 points of margin on a message. And it ended up being 25% of their overall business. So I think big opportunity for messaging. We should have talked about it more in terms of the intelligent workplace, where I think it's really interesting if you can build it into workflow. If you build it into, dentist appointments and all these sorts of things you can do, that's where the opportunity is. And it's an opportunity we're going to be writing more about, and the market is just not, it's a bit. When I talk to CPaaS players and I say, what's your go-to-market? Because I always ask people what their go-to-market is. They say developers. And I go,
which isn't a go-to-market.
It's not. And these mystery developers, where do they work? What do they do? Do you just sort of, everybody gives me this answer. It's the developers. And surely they work somewhere, or I don't know. It just confuses me. So, yeah, so I've done the longest-winded answer to your question ever. So messaging, CPaaS, and I struggle a little bit. Messaging, huge opportunity, but it's also about understanding the workflows and being in the intelligent workplace. It's a good point. When I next present, I'm going to talk about that within that concept. So,
and I would agree. I would agree with that. I think going to the 8x8 analyst conference, ultimately you're using embedded messaging as a feature of CX provision. So that, and I think is the primary use case, and especially in Asia, those markets are massively dependent on it. I think the question is whether there will be an increase in the voice element of CX over and above messaging in markets that are already heavily dependent on messaging, and I think the argument for that is probably not. So you're right, it's a huge growth area. How much will voice sort of take as a part of that as an additional point? But
any other questions? No. I think it might be, have they set up the beer yet? Because I know what this group can be like. Last year we made the mistake of the beer running out, and we finished the bar too early. So is the beer ready?
It's going to be a mystery, but I've prompted them to be ready. Yes.
Okay, great. So I just do one wrap up, which is really to thank you all for sticking around for the whole day, which is brilliant. I'd also like to just reinstate our thanks to our core sponsors. You know, we can't do these events without your support, so we do really appreciate it. And to my team, you know, Trent was not sent here because you wanted to come back home. I didn't send him, did I?
I think that's how Australia started.
No. Let's not go there. Let's not go there.
Be careful here, mate. You won't be invited back.
Can you swim?
Not very well, actually.
No, because there's some water out there. But Trent took on the opportunity to come over here and, you know, within 6 months set up this event. We did it first time last year. This year, you know, much bigger. Helping us build a community. So I'd just like to say a big thank you to Trent, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.